The European Union, EU, is on the brink of a large-scale trade war with the United States. After US President Donald Trump unexpectedly announced a 30% tariff on European goods set to take effect on August 1st, 2025. In an immediate response, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen declared that the EU remains open to negotiations before the deadline, but firmly stated that the bloc will steadfastly defend its interests and will not hesitate to implement proportional countermeasures. These crucial discussions will determine whether the EU proceeds with retaliatory tariffs on 21 billion euros, 24.55 billion USD worth of US goods, and direct response to Washington's 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imposed since June 2025, or chooses to further delay such action. Additionally, the EU has two supplementary tariff packages ready, targeting a total of 93 billion euro worth of American goods, if deemed necessary. In the next 15 minutes, join Economy Roast as we break down the layers of this escalating conflict and uncover what's truly at stake in this high-stakes standoff.
The United States have sent us a letter with measures that would come into effect unless there is a negotiated solution. So we will therefore also extend the suspension of our countermeasures till early August. And at the same time, we will continue to prepare further countermeasures so we are fully prepared. Very important in this is always the second and the third element. The second element is to diversify our trade relationships. So this big and important political agreement on a free trade agreement with Indonesia is today a huge milestone forward and shows that we are looking for new open market. So we have, as you know, a two-track approach. It's very important. We have always been very clear that we prefer a negotiated solution. This remains the case, and we will use the time that we have now till the 1st of August. And on the second track, since the very beginning, we have worked and now are ready to respond with countermeasures. We've prepared for this, and we can respond with countermeasures if necessary. So this two-track approach pays off because we are prepared. On your question, as you know, we have prepared and agreed on a first list of countermeasures. We have developed a second potential list of countermeasures that is by now agreed to. And the ACI is created for extraordinary situations. We are not there yet. This is very important. This is now the time for negotiations, but this also shows we are prepared for all eventual scenarios.
On July 13th, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that he would work closely with French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to address the escalating trade war with the United States. Merz noted that Germany's economy would be heavily impacted by the tariffs, and he is making every effort to ensure that the U.S.'s 30% tariff is not implemented.
If it were to happen, then we would be able to put large parts of our economic policy efforts on the back burner, because that would overshadow everything and hit the German export industry to the core. But I would like to say once again that this is precisely why I have been traveling so much. Incidentally, the G7, Europe, the European Summit and the NATO Summit were in the Chancellor's diary before I became Chancellor myself, and it goes without saying that I attend these events. But I also do them to represent Germany well, to make our voice heard, and to ensure that these tariffs of this magnitude do not materialize. And that requires two things: unity within the European Union and sensible dialogue with the American president. But not before 1st August, and I discussed this intensively over the weekend with both Macron and Ursula von der Leyen, with the US President on Friday. We want to use this time now, the 2.5 weeks until 1st August, to find a solution. And I am really committed to this. The negotiations were already quite far along. We have also seen that with other countries. Canada, China, there have been many such letters. At the end of the day, there were also negotiating positions. And then there were usually, not always, but mostly, sensible solutions. And I am fighting for this for Europe.
European economic experts have unanimously warned about the consequences of the new wave of tariffs. On the side of Europe's major export industries, numerous voices have raised concerns about the potential damages caused by rising tariffs. The German Industry Association, BDI, called it a serious warning signal that could derail economic recovery and hinder innovation. The German Automotive Industry Association, VDA, stated that the costs from trade tensions have already reached billions of euros and continue to rise daily. Representatives from Italy's food and manufacturing industries have also strongly voiced their opposition.
Well, we saw that last week when we had the first letter day that markets hardly reacted at all. But I think now with the 30% threat for the European Union and the 30% threat for Mexico, markets will react with volatility, probably with some correction, and again, new uncertainty. When you really look at the economic impact of 30% tariff, this means 0.4 percentage points less GDP growth for the Eurozone. And if you think where we're currently standing, well, consensus expectation 0.7, 0.8% GDP growth for Europe this year. Well, this would mean if we were to get the 30% tariffs, that Europe would again be pushed back close to recession. And that is clearly a scenario Europe should try to avoid. It looks indeed as if financial markets have grown numb on what comes out of the Oval Office. Yes, it all looks like strategic uncertainty, but how much uncertainty can you take? So financial markets seem to choose and to opt currently for the idea that in the end there will be a deal. They're opting for this idea that it will not escalate any further, and they have also grown numb. So I think this is what happens if you escalate too often. At a certain point, people stop listening. I hope that the European Union has a strategy that is not depending on letters out of the White House or on any posts on Truth Social, but that the European Union, the European Commission actually have a longer-term negotiation strategy here. And this strategy should be that they are willing to lower some of the non-tariff hurdles for U.S. exports coming to the European Union. And at the same time, I think that the European Union will also offer to purchase more goods from the U.S., but without completely giving up and really without becoming a minority or a inferior position in these negotiations. Because I think the European Union should make very clear that it is also having a huge single market, that it's negotiating from a position of strength, but also from a position of a willingness to find a deal that suits both sides. I wouldn't even know whether the August 1st deadline is really an extremely hard deadline or whether it's not also a flexible deadline, because in the end, no one wins trade wars. They only know losers. But if the European Union was to retaliate after August 1st, I think they would first come with tariffs on US goods. They would probably come up with a very gradual implementation of retaliation measures. I don't think that the European Union would really go all in terms of imposing tariffs on US services, because the European Union knows that, yes, it is in a position of strength, but at the same time, the European economy is still in a very fragile state, and that starting a trade war right now would clearly dent this very tentative recovery we're currently experiencing in Europe. Yeah, I think the European Union has a couple of options here. We know from the last time when Donald Trump was in office, and we also had these trade negotiations, that the European Union offered to purchase soybeans and LNG from the US. This could still happen this time around. On top of that, we know that the European Union is increasing its defense spending. So why not offering to purchase more military equipment from the US? I think that could already be something that would help these negotiations. And then the ultimate option would be to impose tariffs on digital services coming out of the US. But Europe knows if they were to start this ultimate policy tool, then they're really in the midst of a fully fledged trade war, something I don't think that the European Union is willing to engage in.
But obviously, this is a big shock overall, because 30%, this is on the upper end of the expectation that markets had with respect to the outcome of the so-called negotiations. If you look at the trade issue in an isolated way, I would very much recommend to take a hard stance, because in my view, and this is also confirmed by economic models, the United States might even suffer more than the European Union from those tariffs which are implemented by or planned to be implemented by the European Union. The tariffs will provoke an inflationary impact in the United States. And inflation means less purchasing power for the people and for consumers. And the United States is very much reliant on consumption as a driver of United States economic growth. And by this way, it will take quite a significant hit the economy. And so there is some leverage here. And I think the hope is more that you put pressure on those companies, and those companies go to the White House and put pressure on those who are responsible there and say, okay, let's. Why don't you think this twice if it's really necessary to do this? With respect to GDP growth, to growth of the economy, I think that our forecast is right now, without these tariffs, for Germany at 1.6%, and for the European Union at around 1.3%. Now, if these tariffs came into place, then we would have to bring down this growth forecast to 1.3% for Germany for next year, for 2026. We're talking about 2026, and for the European Union to around 1%. So lower, not a catastrophe for the markets, but still quite significantly lower, is that Germany is quite well positioned to face this external crisis, because they are in the process of implementing this huge infrastructure program of 500 billion euro. They are at the same time as other European countries as well, increasing their defense spending from 2 percentage points of GDP to 5 percentage points of GDP. And this obviously could counterbalance the loss of demand from the United States.
French cheese and wine producers have warned that the 30% tariff threatened by U.S. President Donald Trump on EU imports will negatively impact the country's agricultural sector. France's dairy industry exports nearly half of its production, primarily to the U.S., mainly cheeses like Emmental and Brie, but also fresh products such as yogurt and butter. This industry risks losing tens of millions of euros in revenue as it sells 350 million euro, 409.17 million USD worth of dairy products to the US market annually. This is a very important market for us. This market accounts for around 350 million euros yearly for dairy products, cheeses in particular. We export 25 tons of cheese to the United States yearly. And so this is a shock. Although, unfortunately, we were expecting it a bit. We were starting to see quite significant figures on the evolution of the tariffs, but 30% is really a shock, and it's a very bad signal sent by the United States to its European trade partners. This measure comes as part of a desire of the United States President and the new administration in the United States to put in place a system that completely shakes up international trade and that creates shock effects among its trade partners. It really redefines trade as we have known it in the world since the end of World War II. On the market of entry-range cheeses, or so-called commodity-type products, the price elasticity will be a lot higher. And so we could see that within the 350 million euros in earnings that this represents each year, this could represent several tens of millions of euros of potential losses, which we could forecast. We're talking about August 1st, that's coming quickly. That's in about 2 weeks, so I have trouble seeing how we can achieve negotiations that have not been successful for months. So, unfortunately, I am not very optimistic, but we'll leave space for discussions. And I think the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has also shown her interest in being able to talk up to the end. And so we hope that reason will prevail, and that the trade interests that link us with the United States, which are important and historic, last. If we want to preserve the exports and the value for all our actors, especially French agriculture and farmers, if some markets are more difficult to approach, we have to find others. And we have to be very proactive. And we really need French economic diplomacy to help us open these markets. Tomorrow, will the current map of our exports be the same in 10 years? Maybe not. And so it's up to us to adapt. And good for us, the dairy and cheese industries that I represent are very agile and know how to adapt to conditions that are sometimes a bit turbulent. But we are prepared for this. And in any case, we remain vigilant and ready to modify our trade zones.
Well, it shows that Donald Trump thinks he can maybe get a deal by threatening to escalate. But I have to think, I think it will backfire. I think what he has signaled to the EU is that all the efforts that the European Commission has made to try to accommodate, try to negotiate a deal, meant nothing for Trump. He gave the EU, threatened the EU 30%. He threatened Japan, South Korea with 25. Mexico also got 30% threat today. So it basically means that all our efforts to try to find a deal seemingly has meant nothing for Trump. I think you could have a potentially a significantly negative market reaction on Monday. I certainly do not believe that this was the market consensus, that Trump would escalate to this level. As the Commission also said in its statement, it took note of the letter, but it stood ready to obviously, quote unquote, defend the EU interest, which means potentially without a deal retaliation. So absolutely, we're lining up, arming, putting a bullet in the gun, and then we will see, and putting the gun on the table. The EU really has no other choice. If there is no deal by by August 1st, which I think is less likely now, then we're in a trade war, and we will have to see where it ends.
The harsh rhetoric and the rare show of unity within the EU suggest that the bloc's patience is wearing thin. Developments in the coming days will determine whether the world's two largest economies can reach an agreement or plunge both sides into a full-scale global trade war.